So this is actually our first webinar, which is the first of a new series that we're launching called Zoom In on Norfolk Network. We're going to be running a webinar about every fortnight, and we're going to give you access to some really interesting speakers, sort of to provide sort of valuable knowledge and connections and support, during this period. And also it's a platform for our members as well to share information as well. So for those of you who don't know Heloise, she's a founder of a multilingual marketing company called Sell Beyond. They're a specialist Amazon consultancy, and the business grows top brands all over the world. So over to you, Heloise.
Hi everybody, thanks Lucy for your introduction. It's a sunny day. This is a talk about taking inspiration, appreciating what we've got, and just making something good out of the day. I've only got 2 slides. This is really a personal talk. What are we doing today? So this talk is a talk about businesses that transform. So I just want us to think about the current challenges that we have, how we can all adapt our processes and offering. The key question of today is, are you looking at the butterflies? And then I've got some action points to take home with you. So that's what we're going to look at this morning. And the first thing I'd like to do is just run a poll. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. How optimistic are you feeling today about business? Today, I'm an optimist. I'm a 10 out of 10, but that's because I'm an optimist, and people around sometimes find that hard.
What's the question? Optimism
how
about the...
How are you feeling today about business, since we're a bunch of entrepreneurs here? As always, 10. I love it, Brian. That's great. Yep. But it's okay not to be a 10. It's also okay to say you're having a rough day, because we all need support, right? Lovely. The sun is shining. Well, the sun is certainly shining. Well, I hope that as you should be able to, you can send us a private message to people through the chat function. You just have to click on the blue button and just show and choose the person that you want. So do feel free to make conversations with people that are feeling great or aren't feeling so great today. I won't be able to chat right now because I just want to make sure you get value about what I'm going to say. But do send messages to each other, because we're all here to support. We're all in this together, right? So many of us might be familiar with the really famous stories of how companies have pivoted. There are some real famous ones out there. I'm going to go through a few of them, and I'll be sharing some examples. However, I've also been speaking to some amazing business owners in the region over the last couple of weeks, and I'd like to share some of their stories about how they've dealt with challenging times, either in the current moment or in previous years. So this is a talk about transformation, pivoting, but this is our story as well, because we're all in this together and we're all trying to figure out a way to muddle through. So I hope that we can take inspiration from each other. We can take inspiration from the stories of local business owners and just try and make something of the day. That's what I'd like everyone to get out of the session. So I'd like to start with a conversation I had with one of my own clients last week. He's based in the southwest of the UK, and his business is selling water sports equipment, wetsuits, that type of thing. The beaches are closed. No one can buy his stuff anymore. But he lives in a beautiful part of the world, and it's just him and his wife who run the business. So I rang him up and I asked him, did you need any support right now in any way to do with the things I know about, which is Amazon and marketing? And he said, no, I'm treating this period like semi-retirement. I originally trained in horticulture many years ago before I became an entrepreneur. So this month I will be spending time in the garden and learning how to grow really good carrots. So on one hand, I was like, that's not a very entrepreneurial thing to do. It's perhaps not the pivot story that you might be expecting from me. But on the other hand, I feel it's the best lesson of anything I could share with you. It's the ultimate pivot. For me, the conversation with this guy was super inspiring, because Mark, down in the southwest, is making the best out of what he's got. He's running with it. He can't sell wetsuits, so he's going to do some really, really good raised beds and make some great carrots and appreciate the sunshine. So as the great country and western singer and philosopher, who is a fantastic and inspirational entrepreneur, Dolly Parton, a fame of mine, said, The way I see it, if you want the rainbow, you've got to put up with the rain. So we could grow carrots, we can do something else, but let's just try and work with what we've got. To be fair, that particular business owner, he does have the luxury of not having a lot of staff on furlough. That's not a position that people want to be in, be putting staff on furlough. We can't all grow carrots. Some of us simply have to come up with a solution right now. And this is, fortunately, unfortunately, where having your back against the wall and cash flow only going one way, out, can actually be the boost that you need. Never allow a good crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do the things you once thought were impossible. So that's a quote from Rahm Emanuel, who served as Chief of Staff to the Obama administration from 2009 to 2010 in the middle of the financial crisis. Whatever we think about the politics, we have to remember that now we can think creatively. We have to think creatively. What else are we going to do, even if we're facing huge challenges? And to be frank, what challenge could be huger, if in business terms, about Apple deciding it's going to muscle in on your business? I don't know who knew here that Twitter used to be a podcasting platform. Don't know if anybody knew that. It's an actual fact. Twitter started out in 2005 as an Audio, which was a podcasting company founded by Evan Williams. When Apple iTunes moved into podcasting, Audio found itself going nowhere fast, and so it needed to pivot. After giving the employees 2 weeks to come up with new ideas, the company decided to make a dramatic change and run with the idea of a microblogging platform. So in this case, the company saw the writing on the wall and ran with whatever idea someone came up with. It just happened to work. A common trait of entrepreneurs, we could argue, is that we dream or imagine where we want to be in the future, and then things tend to come through us in some form or fashion. Another story that I found out this last week by doing a fair bit of research comes from the biggest epidemic the world ever knew, which had a lot more fatal consequences than coronavirus. What am I talking about? You can jump in or you can put it in the chat. The biggest epidemic that we've seen, way beyond what's happening at the moment. The plague, potentially, that's arguable. We probably have less statistics. Black Death, no, that's not what I think. More recent, 20th century.
Spanish flu?
Spanish flu, that's right, yeah. So Spanish flu or influenza epidemic that happened at the end of the First World War, so 1918, 1919. And the story I'm going to tell you is about a massive pivot of an entire industry. So we all know, some of us may not particularly like, the big studios in Hollywood, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers. But did you know that the major US film studios were born out of the Spanish flu epidemic? So we're back in 1918. The First World War is still raging, and Spanish flu has hit the United States. And in many parts of the United States, a bit like now, cinemas were forced to close. When cinema closed, film production companies decided to withhold new releases because the cinemas were being closed. Film production then itself ground to a halt because demand for new movies suddenly stopped. And then a few weeks later, when the armistice was signed, so the end of the First World War in November 1918, the public immediately lost interest in war movies. Cinemas are closed, the market for war movies, the bottom is being torn out of it. War movies suddenly seemed dated, they were unpopular, they reminded people of what they didn't want to do. It was a crisis. No one knew how to cater for the new tastes in the American film-going public. So what happened? Did you know that the film producers who hesitated lost ground in the struggle? Those who disregarded common business prudence and rushed ahead on a hunch to pump out new kinds of films saved their skins. So in this incident in the US film industry, the smaller companies hesitated. They couldn't decide what to do. Should they try and run their old war movies? Should they just try something else? They went out of business. This allowed other companies to buy up the assets, regroup, grow, and thrive. The resulting shakeout of US film production led to a consolidation that made the big production companies even bigger. And that's what created the studios, the big ones that became the masters of production, distribution, and exhibition. The flu, combined with the end of the First World War, gave rise to the mega Hollywood that we all know. Whether we like or don't like the mega Hollywood, that is an actual fact. So now, as then, I would argue that the big decisions to be made and the ones that will determine the future of the movies and potentially all of the creative arts, fashion, theatre, are the bold artistic decisions, the bold creative decisions, running with what's in your gut rather than hedging your bets. And that might be a lot of YouTube videos or TikTok videos of people in their bedrooms, or a lot of webinar productions right now. But they might be the one thing that could ride the wave and change into something big. So that's a story from history that might make us think. So classic quote from Winston Churchill: to improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often. So another poll, I'm not going to run the poll of the huge embarrassment of not working, put it in the chat. How many times has your business or your activity already pivoted? Once, twice, or too many to count? So I'm going to put my too many to count. Anyone who went to my portfolio career talk knows that I'm definitely pivoted a lot of times.
What's the question again?
My question is, how many times have you already pivoted, changed what you're doing in your existing business or activity? Over my career constantly, says Brian Bush. How many times have you already had to change before the current circumstances? Once, 3 to 4, twice, many times. So we're all experts in we're a startup, but you've pivoted from something else, right? If you started up, you started from somewhere else. So hopefully what we can see is all the people in the room on the webinar. We've already got a bunch of, we've done this before, right? We're pros. Once, but not a full 180-degree turn. What does that mean? Like 95 degrees, 118? There
was change, but it was related still to where I was before, but significant change. So, yeah. Change
is still change, right? I mean, and
exactly.
I think one of the things that I often think of when people say, "Oh, it's not really new," it's not real change. There's nothing new under the sun, but it's just making the decision to take some action. That's we constantly evolve and move forward. I think you all agree with that. So. A story that you may not know of someone who changed and changed again, and I love his startup story, is the founder of Goo desserts. You know, the chilled chocolate ones you get in the supermarkets with the little umlaut on the E. I guess some of you have tried them. In the early 2000s, a man sat down on a ski lift next to the founder, James Averdike, and asked him what he did for a living. Averdike paused by saying, "I run a chocolate puddings business." When asked where he could buy these puddings, Averdike told the man he was in talks with 2 big supermarkets. In fact, it wasn't true at all. But the idea of running a chocolate puddings business so appealed to Averdike that he went on to found Goo in 2003. How did he start? Now, this is the best creative bit. This is the bit that I love about the story. He had no marketing budget. He had a kitchen. He cooked some prototype products. He created some cardboard packaging. He sneaked into supermarkets with his prototype packaging and arranged his desserts in the chilled aisle around the ones that the supermarket had actually bought. And then he hung around the chilled food aisle, looking at buyer behavior, how they noticed the products, did they pick them up? And if consumers did pick them up, thinking they were actually buying the supermarket product, James Averdike would approach them, explain that the products were in testing phase, and get some instant free consumer feedback. So James Averdike said, "I did nothing for 2 years after having the idea, and then finally thought, yes, it's time to do it." And he says that's the key thing, actually taking the action. So taking the action, but how? How at the moment can we all take action? So at the weekend, I called up another entrepreneur that I know down in Ipswich as a Suffolk person. He runs a product design company and has done since the 80s. And he told me that in the middle, I think probably the recession in 1991, I'm surprised he wasn't arrested. Yes, I think he probably was as well. But he just he just did it. It's, you've got to try it and see if you can get away with it. I guess that's the moral of that story. And when we're taking action, this design entrepreneur friend of mine said in the middle of the 90s recession, he wrote to all of his clients and said, I've invested in some new technology that is going to make your business work quicker and faster for less money. So in the middle of a great economic recession, he gave out the vibe of having done something new and being confident. And he said he had a lot of pickups. At that time, he had bought CAD, which is computer-aided design software. It was a big thing in the early 90s. And he said the fact of writing to all of his clients, contacting them and giving them the impression that he was confident in the future and was going to run with some new type of investment got him a lot of business at a time where a lot of design companies were going bust. And he introduced me to another East Anglian entrepreneur on Monday. And this is a story of a joiner called Mike. His company was going through a recession. He was facing bankruptcy. His business partner had left him because the company wasn't making any money. The bank then cancelled the joint overdraft because the business partner had left. Mike looked around himself. He was at the bottom of a trench and it was raining. He got into the car to go home and looked at all the sash windows in the houses on the way home. And he thought, look at all those houses with sash windows. There's no one specialising in making the fittings, and there might be an opportunity here. So with his last bit of money from child allowance, I think, which is rather naughty, Mike bought some timber, started on his own in the joinery business. And when his business got a little better, he bought a second-hand injecting moulding machine. Given that the guy was a joiner, he learnt from scratch with no experience how to make plastic parts. Once he had a prototype, he got the parts manufactured in brass. And then, because it was back in the day in the 80s, he bought the 54 volumes of the Yellow Pages and he spent evenings and weekends writing to joiners across the UK and telling them about his new sash windows fittings. And I spoke to Mike on Monday afternoon and I asked him what was the turning point for him. And he said at one point he only had 6 weeks left of cash flow to keep him going and he just needed to sell those sash windows fittings. And he sat there with his Commodore 64, because it was back in the 80s, and a database and a label printing machine, evenings and weekends. And he said to himself, this is either a story I'm going to tell my grandchildren about how I managed to run the business, or it's going to fail. It's going to be one or the other. And he said to me on Monday, I always thought I had nothing to lose. When you have nothing, the only way is up. You've just got to get stuck into it. So Mike Dearham, who's that gentleman, grew that company into a multi-million-pound business called Mighton Parts, M-I-G-H-T-O-N, Parts. They're based outside of Cambridge. They've got an e-commerce website. They still specialise in sash windows fittings. He didn't have business acumen. He didn't have particular skills. He was a joiner. He just made a gut decision and the blind fear of looking into the abyss enabled him to proceed. So bringing it back to Norfolk, I'd like to share with you a super inspirational conversation I had about 2 weeks ago. I got introduced to an 80-year-old CEO. I won't say who it is, but he's got a factory up in Norfolk. Toys R Us was one of their biggest clients before that closed. Mothercare was an important account before that closed. He's already been hit hard by the decline of the high street. He's just had to close the factory because of social distancing. And yet he still wanted to speak to me about Amazon marketing. And he said, well, e-commerce is even more important than ever before. This crisis will pass and we need to come out stronger. I was on the phone to him and I couldn't believe how calm he was, taking the long view, even amidst the chaos and the problems and closing down and everything. And so after the call, I emailed one of his employees to thank him for interviewing us. And you know what he said? He said, the boss is incredibly calm despite everything going on. But to be honest, he's lived through so many events that I don't think he fears much. And reflecting on my conversation with that CEO, I figured that he's seen it all. And if you learn one thing, it's that things will pick up again. And I feel like that's the inspiration we all need, whatever our business model, whatever our activity that we're doing, we just need to cling on to the fact that there's something we can do and we can do it now. And I'd like to end with a piece of advice from my 81-year-old mother, Nathan Finch, who lives just over the next village in East Anglian. And she's always told me that when you think you can't move on and that you're absolutely stuck, start by doing something for somebody else. You will feel better. Hopefully that someone else will feel better. And it's one step in the right direction. So in the spirit of my mother's advice, always take advice, always listen to your mother. It always ends up better that way. I'm just going to share my screen for one quick second there. Up. So let's take action. Today, I'd like you to make a resolution. What are you going to do for somebody else today? And what are you going to do for yourself? Have you made some space today to think creatively? Whether that's growing carrots or watching butterflies, because my mother's other key expression, never go too fast or you might miss a butterfly. Take some time out today to just think, appreciate, and watch the butterflies. For those of you that are in business and want a bit more structured support, I'm going to put in the chat to link to a New Anglia Growth Hub workshop in conjunction with Phil Budd, who's a business coach. Stop, reflect, pivot. That might be a good option for some of you that want a bit more structured support. And one more thing I would love you to do, many of you know Nathan Lomax at Quickfire Digital, who runs a Norwich web design agency. Him and I are doing a webinar next week on improve your Amazon and Shopify e-commerce marketing. I'm going to put some LinkedIn posts and Facebook posts out this afternoon. We'd love it if you could share those posts. Many of you know Nathan does a lot of charitable work. He's super, super abundant with his time. He's taught me loads. So if you could share that, that might be even your one thing that you're doing for someone else today. But that's my take on this morning. Love to take questions, comments, and maybe we can start a conversation with the 25 people in the room. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Heloise. That's fantastic. And if you've got any questions, but also if you want to sort of share some of if you feel you can, or want to share some of the challenges or positions that you're in now, and just sort of get some group feedback as well.
Yeah, I mean.
So yeah, fire away.